Hey everyone, it's Alex. In my last video that I posted, I counted down my top 15 worst films of 2017. Now I'm here to talk about my top 15 best films of 2017, plus of course my honorable mentions. Now, even though there were some truly god-awful films in 2017, there were also quite a lot of films in 2017 that were awesome, amazing, inspirational, and even very moving. And even though there is a lot of crap out there, when the good movies are good, not just good but great, they truly showcase just some of the best cinema that Hollywood has to offer. And I'm here today to sing the praises of those movies that I feel truly were the best movies of 2017. Now, of course, my list is not going to be like everyone else's. Some films that I have in my top 15, you may have in your top 10, top 15, whatever. Some of my honorable mentions you may have in your top list. This was not an easy list for me to make, and there were quite a lot of films I had to leave out of the top 15 just simply because there was not enough room. But after a long, hard, thoughtful process, I think I have finally boiled it down to what I think are the best films of 2017. So, without any further ado, let's dive right into my list, starting of course with the honorable mentions. My honorable mentions are Born in China, the Lego Batman movie, A Quiet Passion, Life, Thank You for Your Service, Beauty and the Beast, Split, It Comes at Night, Baby Driver, Ingrid Goes West, American Made, Marshall, Last Flag Flying, The Florida Project, Wonderstruck, Darkest Hour, Novitiate, Lady Macbeth, Only the Brave, Lady Bird, It, Get Out, The Zookeeper's Wife, Alien Covenant, and finally, Battle of the Sexes. Like I said before, there were so many great movies, I just didn't have enough room to put them all in here, and quite a lot of these movies I'm sure you might have in your top 10 or top 15. Now, I should mention there were some films I had wanted to see before I could make this list, but those films have not yet come out in my area, and they include The Post, Molly's Game, I, Tonya, Call Me By Your Name, Hostiles, and Phantom Thread. So those are the films that I wish I could have put on this list if I had been able to see them, but because they only got a limited release in December and are getting a wide release now in January, I will not be able to see them until the coming weeks. So, just wanted to put that out there. So let's dive into my actual top 15 list. Here we go. Number 15, A United Kingdom. Now, this movie came out way back in March. I won't blame you if you haven't heard of this film because it did get buried amidst big blockbuster films like Logan and Kong Skull Island, because this is more of an art house film, but it's definitely an art house film you should check out, especially if you're into real-life historical stories. A United Kingdom tells the story of the marriage of Seretse Khama and Ruth Williams. They were a couple who came from two completely different backgrounds. Seretse Khama was a black man who was a prince in what is now the modern African nation of Botswana, and Ruth Williams was a working-class white woman from the United Kingdom. And they ended up meeting, falling in love, and getting married in the 1940s, no less, when interracial marriage was very strongly opposed by almost everybody, and their marriage ends up having significant political and social consequences, both in Great Britain and in Botswana, when it was still technically a colony of Great Britain. They encounter racism from both Botswanans and Britons, and they end up being separated due to legal issues, and they both have to work to literally get back to each other, and they both have to work to achieve acceptance of the two of them as a couple amidst the Brits and the Botswanans. And this film is everything you want to see in a biographical historical drama. The acting is fantastic. David Oyelowo and Rosamund Pike are fantastic as Seretse Khama and Ruth Williams. You absolutely buy the chemistry they have with each other. The rest of the supporting cast is good. I don't remember all their names, but one of them is Tom Felton, Draco Malfoy from the Harry Potter films. He's really good as this snooty government official. The direction by Ama Asante is fantastic. She directed a really good film a few years ago called Belle, starring Gugu Mbatha Raw. You should check that out if you haven't seen it. The historical stuff is very cool to see. The production design for both Britain and Botswana is fantastic, and it's great to see history being played out, and it's great to see this story that even I, as someone with a degree in history, never knew about, be played out on the screen, because this is one of those inspirational stories that it's honestly shocking most people still don't know about Seretse Khama and Ruth Williams, because they really had to fight for a lot, not only to be together as a couple, but to create positive change, because Seretse Khama is directly responsible for helping to create the modern-day African nation of Botswana. And I always like it when movies portray a hero from real-life history that most people don't even know about, and the United Kingdom does that fantastically. Number 14, The Disaster Artist. This movie, of course, is about the behind-the-scenes of the making one of the most infamous movies of all time, The Room, a movie considered so bad it's good. I still have never seen the actual movie, The Room, but I have read the book this is based on, and my God, it was one of the most hysterical books I had ever read in my life, and I read a lot of books. And the movie is just as hysterical, and it perfectly captures the hilarious spirit of the book, and it includes quite a lot of the scenes that made me laugh while reading it that I was curious about how it would be depicted on screen. The acting all around is fantastic. James Franco is both hilarious and moving as Tommy Wiseau. He gets the accent down, he has the look down right. Dave Franco, who of course is James Franco's brother in real life, he's great as Greg Sestero, who becomes Tommy Wiseau's friend and his main co-star on The Room. The rest of the supporting cast is excellent, with Seth Rogen as the script supervisor, who's kind of like the second director, particularly in the scenes featuring Tommy, and all the actors playing the other actors of The Room, like Josh Hutcherson, Zac Efron, Jackie Weaver. They're all great as well. The writing is fantastic. James Franco does an excellent job in the director's chair as well. And the humor. This film had me laughing hysterically throughout the entire 2-hour runtime. And that's what I want to see in a movie that's being billed as a comedy. I want to laugh, but I also want to laugh at jokes that are actually funny, and jokes that actually serve the story. Unlike movies such as Fist Fight, Rough Night, Father Figures, and The House, this movie actually knows what it's doing. It actually has a story in order to make the jokes work, because you cannot have good jokes work if they don't have a good story for them to work off of. And the message of this movie is also great too. Even though The Room, is hailed as one of the worst movies of all time, but still fun to watch, it still has an inspirational message about pursuing your dream and never giving up, especially after everyone who could have helped you has turned their back on you, and just not being afraid to take risks, even if you have no idea how they'll pay off. And like the final 30 minutes when we actually see the premiere of The Room and how the audience reacts to it, it's one of the most moving things I've seen in a film all year. This is definitely a film for people who love films about other films. This is definitely a great film for people who love behind-the-scenes looks at Hollywood. And overall, it's just a great film if you just love films in general and just want to have a good time and laugh. Number 13, The Big Sick. The Big Sick is a romantic comedy done right, because it has heart, it has soul, it has great acting, great writing, great directing, and it has a complex story to go along with it, to the point where you have no idea what's going to happen, rather than being able to predict everything before it actually happens. Now, this movie is actually based on a true story. The main star of this movie, Kumail Nanjiani, who also wrote this movie, he based this story on the time in his life when he was dating his now wife, and when she got sick with a mysterious illness and he had to interact with her parents for the first time. Basically, this is his retelling of that story, and he actually wrote the screenplay with his wife, Emily V. Gordon, and he also stars basically as himself, but instead of Emily V. Gordon playing his wife on screen, because she's not an actress herself, you have Zoe Kazan playing the role, and she's really good, though. The acting is fantastic. Kumail Nanjiani, he's fantastic, not only with writing the screenplay, but also with his performance as basically another version of himself. Zoe Kazan is really good as Emily. Of course, there's a good chunk of the movie where she's not on screen because her character gets sick and has to be put into a medically induced coma. And then you have Kumail Nanjiani's parents and siblings. I forget the actors who played them, but they were really good and they were really funny. And then you had Ray Romano and Holly Hunter as Emily's parents. They were both fantastic. They've been getting some Oscar buzz, Holly Hunter in particular, and it's well deserved. This is one of her better roles in quite a long time. And Ray Romano, this might actually be his best performance that I've ever seen. Because Ray Romano, all people know him for is just his sitcom Everybody Loves Raymond, and of course him being Manny the Mammoth in all the Ice Age films. But in recent years he's actually started to branch out more as an actor and take more risks. And here he plays a more vulnerable character than what he usually plays. And he's fantastic in showing his vulnerable side. And of course, later on this year, he's going to be among the many star players in Martin Scorsese's new film, The Irishman, which I cannot wait to see. And then there are some other characters who are Kumail Nanjiani's fellow comedians, because he's an aspiring stand-up comic in the film. Again, based on a true part of his life during the time this really happened. I forget those actors' names, but they're really good, even though their roles are pretty small. And and the chemistry between Kumail Nanjiani and Zoe Kazan when their characters are dating, it's very real, it's very believable, you genuinely buy that they're a couple. And overall, basically this is everything you want a romantic comedy to be. It doesn't necessarily resort to cliches and stereotypes. It actually has a complex plot that gets unpredictable at times. The characters actually go through development and change. I don't know where this is going to rank in later lists of the greatest romantic comedies of all time, but it should at least hopefully be somewhere in the top 50. Hopefully that will happen. Number 12, Rigsby Bear. The trailer kind of makes it look like the main character is a man-child who's obsessed with a TV show he probably liked as a kid, and in some ways that kind of is in the movie, but it has a much more darker story. I gotta give a little bit of a slight spoiler here because it's very integral to the rest of the story. Basically, Kyle Mooney plays a guy named James who has lived in a bunker his whole life with who he thinks are his parents. Throughout his whole life he's watched this weird kids show called Rigsby Bear, but then it's discovered that the people who raised James are not his real parents and that they kidnapped him from the hospital when he was a baby. And it turns out they were the ones who were making Rigsby Bear the whole time. So after James is rescued and meets his biological family for the first time, he still can't get over Rigsby Bear because that has literally been his whole life. And he decides he's going to make a movie to conclude the TV show. And the process of him trying to make the Rigsby Bear movie is both moving and hilarious. He has no training as a filmmaker. He really has no training for anything because he's had virtually no contact with the outside world. But Kyle Mooney in his performance brings both a great complexity and a great vulnerability to James. So often man-child characters, like the ones Adam Sandler or Kevin Hart usually play, are usually like annoying to the point of sounding like nails on a chalkboard. But here, Kyle Mooney plays a different kind of man-child because, like I said before, he's been cut off from the rest of the world for his whole life. And as he has to literally learn to integrate into everything that he should have been integrated to a long time ago. And the process of him having to go through all that is very moving and quite sad at times, to be honest, because of the heartbreak that you feel not just for James, but for his biological parents who've been searching for over 20 years for him. So not only is Kyle Mooney great, but so are Matt Walsh and Michaela Watkins as James's biological parents, and Ryan Simpkins as James's biological sister, and the actors who play the sisters' friends who help James make the Rigsby Bear movie, they're great too. I can't remember their names at the moment. Mark Hamill, he's great as the guy who kidnapped James. And his role is not just a cameo, it is a small supporting role, and he's great in it. Claire Danes has a small good role as a therapist, and there's a certain Saturday Night Live cast member who makes a cameo. This film is not only about a man learning to come to terms with the world, but it's also, like The Disaster Artist, a tribute to filmmaking itself. Seeing James learn how to be a filmmaker, like I said before, very hilarious and moving. And when the Rigsby Bear movie is finally completed, it becomes one of the most moving and delightful endings to a film that I've seen all year. And if you're not moved by the ending of this film, then I don't know what will move you, because even the most hard-hearted people will be moved by the ending of Rigsby Bear. And I wish this film was getting more awards recognition, because it's gotten no love from the Golden Globes, Critics' Choice Awards, Screen Actors Guild Awards. It's probably not going to get any Oscar nominations because they haven't really launched any kind of campaigning for it. But if I were an Oscar voter, I would absolutely be nominating this film for a lot of things, like Best Picture, Best Actor, Best Original Screenplay, because it genuinely deserves a lot of Oscar attention. It's a shame it's not getting more of it. Number 11, Blade Runner 2049. Now, I'm sure a lot of people may have this way higher on their list, or maybe even at number 1, but at least I have it in my top 15. Now, I was a bit hesitant to see this because I watched the original Blade Runner, and I didn't really hate it, but I didn't really love it either. I gave it like a 6 out of 10. Many people hailed the original Blade Runner as one of the greatest movies of all time, and then there are others who think it's one of the most overrated movies of all time. So I'm kind of somewhere in the middle. Performances and visual effects and cinematography and production design were fantastic, and so was the score, but the pacing was just sluggish as hell. This film, this is everything I wanted the first Blade Runner to be. This film is slow-paced like the original, but Denis Villeneuve is like the master of making good slow-paced films. He's the guy who did Prisoners, Sicario, and Arrival. And everything in this movie works. The performances are fantastic. Ryan Gosling is great as the new Blade Runner K. Harrison Ford, even though he doesn't show up till like 2/3 into the movie, he's great at playing Rick Deckard once again. Robin Wright is great as Ryan Gosling's boss. Ana de Armas and Mackenzie Davis are great in their roles, particularly Ana de Armas as Kay's love interest. Jared Leto is great as well. His role was a lot smaller than I thought it was. He only maybe has 10-15 minutes of screen time total, but when he's on screen, he's really good. And Edward James Olmos even makes a cameo of his character from the original movie. The score by Hans Zimmer and Benjamin Wallfisch is fantastic. The production design is gorgeous, certainly, and it's even better than the original in my opinion. The editing is great. The cinematography is really good. I know a lot of people want Roger Deakins to finally win an Oscar for this movie, and while I definitely think he should be nominated, I still don't think this is the best cinematography of the year. We'll get to that when I get to my number 1 film. But there's not a single flaw that I could really think of in this movie. This movie was like 163 minutes long, and by the time it was over, I could have easily sat for another 163 minutes. I really could. It didn't necessarily end on like a cliffhanger note, although there certainly was potential for more story to be told if they were to make another Blade Runner movie, but sadly they didn't, even though this movie made, I think, somewhere between 250 to 300 million worldwide. It still technically bombed at the box office because it had like a $185 million budget, and you have to make at least twice your budget back at the box office for a film to officially be considered a financial success. And that's a damn shame, because there are many bad movies this year that were box office successes that didn't deserve to be. And there's always good films that should have been box office successes which were not. And Blade Runner 2049 is sadly one of those movies. This definitely is one of the better science fiction films of this decade. I wouldn't say it's the absolute best, because there are a couple of others I would rank higher, like Gravity, The Martian, but this is definitely somewhere in the top 10 if I had to make such a list. Number 10, Mudbound. This is another movie adaptation of a book that I read in the past year. Mudbound is set in rural Mississippi during and after World War II and features two families, the McAllen family, who is white, and the Jackson family, who is black. The McAllens, they moved to this farm in rural Mississippi that has no electricity or indoor plumbing, and the Jackson family are sharecroppers on the land who are saving money to get their own farm someday. Both families have a member who goes off to fight in World War II, and then they both come back and have to deal with readjusting to life. Meanwhile, both families are going through their own problems, and they have to interact with each other and help each other out. And given that they're of two different races, and this is the 1940s, there's definitely some racial tensions involved. Overall, this was a fantastic book-to-film adaptation. Now, of course, it's not a perfect adaptation. There's some elements of the novel that are either ignored or changed, but of course that's the case with almost any book-to-film adaptation. But at least 90% of the novel they got right in this movie. The acting is phenomenal from everyone involved. Carey Mulligan, Jason Clarke, Garrett Hedlund, Jason Mitchell, Mary J. Blige, Rob Morgan, Jonathan Banks. They're all fantastic in this movie, regardless of how big or small their role is. If I had to pick some standouts, I would probably say they are Garrett Hedlund and Jason Mitchell, because it's their characters' friendship that becomes the major point of the film from the second act onward. Although it should be noted this is still an ensemble film, because similar to the book, the movie shifts focus from one narrator to another. There's a lot of voiceover narration from several different characters, telling the story from several different characters' perspective, and while that may sound confusing when you watch the movie, it works phenomenally, because these families are all going through various hardships. Some are different than others, and in some cases they have to work together, and it's great to see how they all have to come together in certain situations to get through whatever they need to get through. The writing is fantastic. Dee Rees and Virgil Williams did a fantastic job of adapting the book. The production design and costume design are very period accurate. The cinematography, beautiful. Rachel Morrison did a fantastic job. And if she were to get an Oscar nomination, she'd be the very first female cinematographer ever to get an Oscar nomination. And her cinematography very much has the feel of a Terrence Malick movie. The styles of shots that she uses and the color palette and the way she positions the camera on the actors' faces, it's very reminiscent of him. Same thing with some of the acting. Since a lot of this is told through voiceover narration, it kind of gave me the feeling of a Terrence Malick movie, because he frequently uses voiceover narration, and the things the characters say are very Terrence Malick-ish. I mean, I don't know if Dee Rees was inspired by Terrence Malick or not. If she was, good for her, because I love Terrence Malick. Now, this film is definitely more straightforward and linear than a typical Terrence Malick film. If you're a Terrence Malick hater, don't get too worried about this film. But the way in which the cinematography and the voiceover narration coalesce into telling the story is just fantastic. Now, as I was saying before, even though all the actors are great, the best part of this movie is the interaction between Garrett Hedlund and Jason Mitchell as Jamie and Roncel. They're the two characters who go off to fight in World War II and then come back, and they're both having trouble readjusting to life because they suffer from PTSD. And Roncel, of course, he has to deal with being black in a society that's very, very racist. And the friendship between their characters is very moving, and it feels realistic, and it's not just thrown in there for the sake of being thrown in there. And of course, Jamie being white and Roncel being black, that causes a lot of problems because people believe the two of them shouldn't be together because of their races, and as a result, there's some pretty terrible things that end up happening that changes the course of everybody's lives in both families forever. Overall, Mudbound is everything you would want to see in an ensemble film. Every character gets a chance to shine, and every person and multiple stories get to be told and come together to form one strong narrative. That's all you can ask for in a film like this, and Mudbound delivers on everything. Number 9, Wonder. This is based on a book that's become quite popular to be used in elementary schools and middle schools as mandatory reading for kids, and I can definitely see why. This is a film about a kid named Augie who has a rare facial condition called Treacher-Collins syndrome, and after years of being homeschooled, he goes to public school for the first time, and of course he encounters some bullying because of his condition, but he also ends up making some friends. And while this movie could have been just another cheesy, sappy, inspirational film like quite a lot of films about people with disabilities and conditions have often been in the past, this thankfully is among the films about people with disabilities and conditions that does it right. And even though this is a family-friendly film, and not a lot of family-friendly films do well critically or get serious attention, this film has been doing that, and rightfully so, because this is how you want to make a family film that anyone can enjoy and that critics can shower high praise on. Everything in this movie is fantastic. Jacob Tremblay as Augie, one of the best lead actor performances of the year. Jacob Tremblay is only like 11 years old, I think, but man, this kid has talent beyond his years. I mean, there are some adult actors who have never given a performance as good as the performance Jacob Tremblay gives here. Jacob Tremblay knows exactly what emotions to use at the right time based on the situations Augie is in. Whenever something bad happens to Augie, you genuinely feel sorry for him. When something great happens to him, you genuinely feel happy for him. You can't help but root for him the whole time. Julia Roberts and Owen Wilson are fantastic as Augie's parents. Isabella Vidovic, I think is her name, is great as Augie's sister. Daveed Diggs is great as one of Augie's teachers. Mandy Patinkin is great in his small role as the principal. And all the other kids in the film are great as well, particularly Noah Jupe, who plays Augie's new friend Jack, and Bryce Geisar as Julian the bully. Now, as this film goes on, you probably might get a good feel of how it's probably going to end or what might happen in certain situations. But even if you can successfully predict what's going to happen, it's not going to diminish all the positive aspects about the film. Usually films like this don't have great writing and directing, but Stephen Chbosky, he's fantastic in doing both. Whenever you have high-quality writers and directors working on family-friendly material, it usually becomes so good that it becomes one of the best movies of the year. I mean, look at 2011's Hugo, which was directed by Martin Scorsese and written by John Logan. That too was based off a children's book, and that became my #1 best film of 2011, and it ended up winning 5 Oscars. And Wonder, I genuinely think it does deserve some Oscar attention, not only for the makeup on Jacob Tremblay, which it probably will be nominated for, but I also think it should be nominated for Best Picture, Best Adapted Screenplay, and even though Jacob Tremblay probably won't get a Best Actor nomination, if he somehow were, he'd be one of those rare child actors who genuinely deserve to be nominated. And the message is very heartwarming. Yeah, it's a message that has been done in many movies before, about acceptance and treating people with respect and standing up to bullies, but they do it in a way that feels right. They don't do it in a way that feels forced or uninspired. You actually see characters go through changes. And in a world where there are so many movies aimed at kids that just get horrible reviews and are just throwing in lots of pop culture gags just to make it entertaining, Wonder actually has a great moral message at its center, combined with a great story that makes it a great film. Number 8, Star Wars Episode 8, The Last Jedi. This movie has certainly gotten a lot of people talking. A lot of Star Wars fans really love it. A lot of Star Wars fans really hate it. Me, I'm one of the Star Wars fans that loves it. I'm a huge Star Wars fan. Been so ever since I was probably about 6 when I watched them for the first time. But I'm not one of those nitpicky Star Wars fans that has to microanalyze everything and say, oh, if this doesn't go this way, then I'm going to hate the movie. The movie should only go like this. Which is what I've seen in some of these fanboy and fangirl reactions of those who hated The Last Jedi. But basically, this was everything I wanted to see in a Star Wars movie and more. Great action sequences, great emotional moments, and great suspense, leaving me wondering what's going to happen next. Everyone is fantastic in the movie. All the players who come back are great, such as Daisy Ridley, John Boyega, Carrie Fisher, Oscar Isaac, Adam Driver, Andy Serkis. But then you have a lot of newcomers who are also great, such as Laura Dern, Benicio del Toro, and Kelly Marie Tran. All the new characters are great. All the old characters are fantastic. Of course, Luke Skywalker finally gets to be front and center in time because at the end of The Force Awakens, we see him, but he doesn't speak. But now we get to see Luke's story finally continue after we saw Han and Leia's continue in The Force Awakens. And although I'm sure many people have seen the movie by now, I'm not going to go into big spoilers because I don't want to ruin the movie for those who have not seen it. But let's just say I was hooked on everything. Every moment I was intrigued with interest. I wanted to see what happened next. The action sequences, fantastic. The suspense, fantastic. The dramatic moments, particularly the moments between Daisy Ridley and Adam Driver, fantastic, unlike anything I've seen in a Star Wars film before. And the last half hour, holy cow. The last half hour of this movie had some of the most jaw-dropping scenes I have ever seen in a Star Wars movie. I was like, whoa. I mean, it was just mind-blowing. And it was so mind-blowing that I just cannot wait to see how they're going to continue on with this in Episode 9. And also, real quick, there's been the debate amongst the fans about the new little creatures called the Porgs. I liked the Porgs. In this one, they were funny, and especially when they had to interact with Chewbacca. Yeah. There's not really much more I can say about this because in doing so, I'd have to pretty much recap the entire movie. Yeah, and I obviously don't have time to do that. But basically, if you're a Star Wars fan, obviously you need to at least see The Last Jedi at least once. You know, don't read anything about it before you see it. Keep your expectations in check and just let it wash over you. Because Star Wars is such a big universe that it's always great to see the story go in a new direction that we don't expect. Because Star Wars needs to have room to breathe and not just stick to just what the hardcore fanboys want to see. And even though Rian Johnson will be handing the reins back to J.J. Abrams for Episode 9, he certainly knocked it out of the park here. Well done, sir. Number 7, Wind River. Taylor Sheridan is another one of those filmmakers who's been on a streak recently. He wrote fantastic screenplays for Sicario and Hell or High Water, and now he not only writes, but he also directs. And he did an absolutely fantastic job with Wind River. This is one of those mystery thriller films that hooks you right in and does not let you go until it's over. Jeremy Renner is this professional trapper who hunts animals like wolves on a Native American reservation, and he's assigned to find who killed this teenage girl along with an FBI agent played by Elizabeth Olsen. And they have great chemistry together, and the mystery itself is very intriguing because there are all these mysterious clues. There's no big obvious reveal that the audience can immediately figure out before the characters figure out. And I like it when we, the audience, get to find out with the characters as they solve the mystery rather than us solve the mystery way before they do. There's several Native American actors in this film, such as Gil Birmingham and Graham Greene. They're all fantastic. And it's nice to see a movie set in the modern day featuring Native American characters, because on the rare occasion that we see Native American characters in a film, it's usually in a more historical film set in the distant past. And thankfully, the Native American characters are just as fully developed and part of the story as the white characters. This is not what you would call a white savior movie where a white guy has to come in and save everybody because they can't save themselves. You know, they work equally with Jeremy Renner. He's good friends with them, mainly because he has a Native American ex-wife and he has a mixed-race son. So as a result, he is part of their community. The cinematography is gorgeous, even though it's a very bleak location they're in because it's the middle of winter and they're in Wyoming, I think. The imagery of the snow is just fantastic. And the suspense. Oh my god, the suspense just hooks you in and does not let you go. And by the time the killer is finally revealed and he gets what's coming to him, you're just like, yes, justice is finally served. If only The Snowman could have done what Wind River did, because when you want to look at what good mystery thriller films, Wind River is what should be done, and The Snowman is what should not be done. Number 6, 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri. This is a pretty interesting film because it takes some pretty serious subject matter in which you have a woman who puts up these billboards to shame the local police department because they failed to catch the rapist/murderer of her daughter. But it also is quite hysterically funny. This is a perfect example of what you would call a good black comedy. Now, the movie itself does not make the murder situation hilarious at all. It really doesn't. Whenever it focuses on the murder of Frances McDormand's daughter, it becomes very serious and dramatic, and you absolutely identify with her character and you understand her motivations for doing what she does. But then in some of the things she does when she's promoting these billboards, they are quite hysterical where you are just laughing your head off. And this movie, if done in the wrong hands, could have been a complete disaster that would have gotten people like me angry. But here, everything works amazingly. Frances McDormand is fantastic, and I honestly think she should win the Oscar for Best Actress, and I think she probably might, and if so, it would be well deserved. Sam Rockwell is also great, even though his character is very despicable and someone you want to see get punished for some of the horrible things he does. He doesn't make the character a one-dimensional caricature. They could have easily done that, but we get to see his character not only face consequences for some of the stuff he does, but actually reflect on how his behavior has affected others. Woody Harrelson is also great as the police chief. Lucas Hedges is great as Frances McDormand's son. John Hawkes is great as her ex-husband. Peter Dinklage is great as this guy who has a crush on Frances McDormand. Caleb Landry Jones is also great as the guy who lets her rent out the billboards. The writing and directing, out of this world. Martin McDonagh, he does both, and he does a fantastic job. A lot of people compare him to Quentin Tarantino with the type of dialogue he uses, and the comparison is well deserved because he knows how to write dialogue that is very witty and very fast and very zany, but he does it in a way where it doesn't feel like we're watching a cartoon, because he knows how to make the dialogue work for whatever situation the movie's in, whether it's very serious drama or very hilarious comedy. He does it all in a fantastic way. The music by Carter Burwell, which is mostly acoustic guitar based, is fantastic and is very catchy. And the story itself goes in so many directions but never feels confusing. It's always very coherent, and it hooks you in so much that by the time the movie's over, you honestly wish you could see more. That some people have said that that's their one flaw with the movie, that there wasn't enough of the movie, and I can agree with them to that, but that doesn't mean I'm not going to give the movie my highest rating, because it's truly one of the most unique movies I've seen in the past year, not only just because of its title, but because of the whole concept. And like I said before, if this concept had been put in lesser hands, it could have been a complete disaster, and it could have been one of the biggest disasters in film of the past year. But thankfully, it's getting all the rightful praise it deserves, and here's hoping it has a nice, healthy awards run. Number 5, Detroit. Kathryn Bigelow is another one of those filmmakers who just never fails to deliver. She did a fantastic job with The Hurt Locker and Zero Dark 30, and now with Detroit, she's still on top of her game. Detroit is about the 1967 Detroit race riots, but rather than be about all the riots as a whole, this movie in particular focuses on the incident that took place at the Algiers Motel, where a bunch of racist white police officers held a group of people hostage, of black men and white women. And it's basically about the terror that they faced as they were being held hostage and whether or not they would actually get to live. But this movie is not just your typical hostage situation. It explores all the characters from all the angles. We see the racist white police officers led by Will Poulter. We see a security guard played by John Boyega. We see the black musicians who get held up in the motel, played by Algie Smith and Jacob Lattimore, and a couple other actors whose names I can't remember. And then Anthony Mackie is also there as well. And we see the white women and those actresses. I can't remember their names off the top of my head. There's so many actors, I can't remember them all. And then near the end, we have John Krasinski as a lawyer. And all the actors, no matter how big or small their role, they're fantastic. And Will Poulter, he is one of the most despicable, disgusting villains of the year. His character is so despicable that you just want to punch him in the stomach and kick him in the groin, because he is just that evil. This guy is a sadistic man. There's no other way of saying it. He's so sadistic that you just want hell to reign over him and punish him for all the horrible stuff he's done. And all the actors who are in the Algiers Motel, their terror is genuine and believable. You literally feel like you're standing right there with them. You literally feel like the gun is being pointed at your head alongside them. And you literally feel like if you don't get out of there soon, you're going to die. I mean, I felt like I couldn't breathe just watching that scene. I was just praying, please let them get out of there alive. Please let them get out of there alive. And by the time it ends, you're relieved that they do get out of there alive, but of course you're also angry when the officers end up getting away with everything they did and being found not guilty, which is what happened in real life. And it made me angry, and it should make you angry too when you watch it. Even though this film mainly focuses on the Algiers Motel incident, there is some nice background information about the riots told through either animation or using documentary footage, kind of like a Ken Burns documentary. Free State of Jones did a similar thing like this last year, but unlike Free State of Jones, this movie actually did it correctly. It actually used the documentary footage to add on to the story, whereas Free State of Jones just did it just to pad out the running time and give the audiences a break from the boredom. And Catherine Bigelow, you know, this is the kind of movie that only someone with her caliber could have pulled off, because she just knows how to make these intense films that just grab you and never let you go, and she is easily one of the best directors working today, and she is definitely, in my opinion, among the greatest female film directors of all time. And she, of course, remains to this date the only female director to win an Oscar for Best Director, which she won for The Hurt Locker. Sadly, she and probably the rest of the cast and crew won't be getting any Oscar nominations for this film because it bombed at the box office and there hasn't really been any awards pushed for it, but it genuinely deserves awards attention because this is a film that we need right now, especially with Donald Trump as the president and all the racist rallies we've been seeing, such as the one in Charlottesville over the summer. This film needs to serve as a reminder of why racism is bad, because if we do not combat racism, then it's only going to keep getting worse. Number 4, The Lost City of Z. This may be another film that you probably may not have heard of because it kind of came and went while being buried amidst blockbusters like The Fate of the Furious. But this is a type of film that's right up my alley because it's a historical drama, and I love historical dramas. This tells the story of a British explorer named Percy Fawcett who made several trips to the Amazon rainforest to look for what he believed was a mysterious lost city that may have been the grandest city in the Amazon rainforest with a civilization far more advanced than people may have thought. And unlike his fellow countrymen, Percy actually has a deep respect for the culture that may have built this lost city. Given that this is the early 1900s, many British just simply refer to rainforest natives as savages, but Percy actually respects their cultures and admires them for how they adapt to living in the rainforest. And unlike most explorers, whenever he does use natives to help him, he doesn't exploit them for his own personal gain and make them into his slaves or anything like that. He uses them as translators, as river guides, useful things, and actually respects them for doing what they do. And Charlie Hunnam, this is easily the best performance of his career. Everyone is great in this movie. Robert Pattinson, I think this is his best performance. I do think it is better than his performance in Good Time. Sienna Miller, she's great as Percy Fawcett's wife. Tom Holland, he's great as Percy Fawcett's son. And the cinematography is absolutely beautiful. The scenes where they're going up the river and going through the jungle, just some of the most beautiful imagery you will see in any movie about exploration. The costume design is fantastic, particularly in scenes where they're at balls and stuff, since this is the early 1900s. Production design is fantastic as well, and the writing and the directing are Oscar-worthy. This is what you would want in a screenplay worthy of a nomination for Best Adapted Screenplay. This, in my opinion, is Oscar-worthy direction from James Gray, who is quite an underrated filmmaker. He's made a lot of movies that may have been loved by critics, but don't really get enough recognition that they deserve. I really loved his film he did a few years ago called The Immigrant, starring Marion Cotillard. Very underrated film, particularly by audiences. Check that film out if you haven't seen it. And even though this is not an Indiana Jones type of adventure movie, the adventure in this movie is, since it's based on real life, is still intriguing enough to keep anyone interested. And for a guy like me who has a degree in history and loves these types of films, this was everything I could have wanted in a historical, true-life adventure film. And it's very refreshing to see a film about an explorer who wants to find something just to prove it existed and not just take it for himself and conquer it. He wants to prove this city existed so that history can document it. And even though this city still has not yet been found and Percy Fawcett disappeared and was never heard from again while trying to find it. As the film closes out, there's a text that says that there has been increasing evidence that maybe Percy Fawcett was right about this lost city based on artifacts and stuff that have been discovered. So who knows, in the future Percy Fawcett could indeed be hailed as the hero that he strives to be. Number 3, The Shape of Water. What a movie this was. I mean, wow. This is one of those movies that has a very bizarre plot, and if in the wrong director's hands or the wrong actor's hands, could have been a complete disaster, but in the right people's hands, it could be something magical, and this movie is indeed magical. This movie is one of the most beautiful movies of 2017. Paper, the central story about a mute janitor rescuing a mysterious South American amphibian creature from a Washington, D.C. laboratory during the Cold War, and the two of them fall in love with each other. On paper, that seems very hokey, but it absolutely works in this movie, and every aspect of it helps make it work. The acting is phenomenal. Sally Hawkins is amazing. Even her character is mute and she has to communicate through sign language. She holds your attention from beginning to end, and you absolutely feel every emotion that she feels. Happiness, sadness, anger, confusion, everything. She's one of the most empathetic characters of the year. Doug Jones is also fantastic as the creature, and of course he doesn't say a word since he's playing this creature, but through the makeup and the CGI, all his emotions are perfectly conveyed, and you definitely feel for him and what his character is going through. Octavia Spencer is both touching and hilarious as Zelda, the friend of Sally Hawkins' character Eliza. Richard Jenkins is great as Giles. He's Eliza's neighbor who's an elderly gay man who's an artist. And then Michael Shannon as the head of the laboratory, one of the best villains of the year. His villain is so despicable that you just cannot wait for something bad to happen to him, and when it does, you are like, yes! Karma! Michael Stuhlbarg is also really great as well. Every actor is fantastic in this movie. There's not a single bad performance. Guillermo del Toro's writing and directing, absolutely perfect. This is one of the best written and directed films of the year, and if Guillermo del Toro does not get an Oscar nomination for both directing and writing, then I will be stunned. The production design is gorgeous. The look of the 1960s government lab, the design of Eliza's apartment, the design of Baltimore and Washington, D.C. in the early 1960s, fantastic. Costume design, perfect recreation of 60s fashion. The music by Alexandre Desplat, the best score of the year. Alexandre Desplat is one of my all-time favorite film composers. He's my second favorite, only behind John Williams. Cinematography, beautiful. Editing, perfect. Sound design, perfect. Visual effects, perfect. This is a science fiction romance film done right. There's definitely a lot of similarities you'll see to other films like Beauty and the Beast and Splash, especially Splash. I picked up on a lot of Splash similarities. However, it does not take away from the many original aspects of this film, because even though there are similarities to these films, the story itself is still unpredictable in its own right, and just when you think something is going to happen, there comes a 180 and something completely different happens instead. This film is slow-paced, but it's a slow-paced film done right. It's a slow-paced film done right to the point where you're allowed to absorb the story as it's being played in front of you, and you're allowed to hold your suspense but not feel like you're being squeezed out of the ability to breathe. You're given room to breathe when you need to, and the pacing perfectly leads up to the action and the climax of the film that will leave you going, oh my god. This is a film that had to live up to a lot of hype ever since it was playing at all the various film festivals and receiving a lot of praise, and it even won the top prize at the Venice Film Festival. And let's just say the hype was right. This is a movie where everything the critics have praised about this movie is correct, and it deserves all the praise and all the awards attention it can get. And I hope it becomes one of the biggest contenders in the Oscar nominations. Number 2, Coco. I'm part of the generation that literally grew up watching Pixar films, and man, Pixar has done it again. Coco is one of the most beautiful, breathtaking, moving animated films, not only of this decade, but it's also just one of the most moving films, period, of this decade. This film is glorious. It's funny, it's heartfelt, it's dramatic, but it does all of those things in the right way. The story is about a young Mexican boy named Miguel who wants to be a musician, but his family strongly hates that. They hate all forms of music, and they will do anything to prevent Miguel from achieving his dream. But then, through a series of incidents, Miguel ends up being transported to the land of the dead, since this movie is taking place around the holiday of Dia de los Muertos, and he has to find a way to get back to the land of the living before time runs out and he's trapped there forever. That's all I'm going to say. I'm sure many of you watching this have already seen Coco, but I'm not going to give away any other major plot points, so that way those who have not seen the movie can go in fresh and as uninformed as possible. But what I can say is that everything in this film is done to perfection. The voice acting is fantastic. Anthony Gonzalez, who voices Miguel, fantastic. The supporting cast, including Benjamin Bratt, Gael Garcia Bernal, Gabriel Iglesias, Cheech Marin, and all the other actors, they're just absolutely fantastic. And given that all the characters in this movie are Mexican, it's refreshing that the entire voice cast is also from Mexico or of Mexican descent, because quite often in voiceover roles you'll have people of various races voice characters of several races, so like a white person voicing a Mexican, for instance. So here it's refreshing to see a race of people portrayed by actors from that same race. The writing is fantastic. Pixar movies always have fantastic writing, and this is no exception. The directing is fantastic. But the best thing about this movie is the music. Oh my god, this music is so beautiful and so moving. Michael Giacchino, fantastic score. This score definitely deserves an Oscar nomination, and it hasn't really been getting a lot of awards love, and it definitely deserves to, because Michael Giacchino did his research on Mexican music, and it shows here. The music is just beautiful to listen to. And then the songs themselves, fantastic songs, especially Remember Me, which is a very, very moving and heartfelt song, especially towards the end. And this song is written by Robert Lopez and Kristen Anderson Lopez, the same songwriters who won an Oscar for the song Let It Go from Frozen. And many people think they'll win again here, and they absolutely deserve to win, and I hope they do win. And then the animation, of course. Pixar animation is always beautiful, and everything from the character designs to the city designs is fantastic. I heard Pixar went to several towns and cities in Mexico to capture the look for Coco, and it definitely shows. And many Mexicans and indeed Latinos from all over Latin America have praised Coco for what they feel is a very authentic representation of them. And it's always nice when a movie is very well received by the audience that is being portrayed in the film. And this film is actually the highest grossing film of all time in Mexico, and I can definitely see why. And of course this movie is a huge box office success around the world, and it absolutely deserves to be. Pixar just knows how to touch people, and this movie deeply touched me. I pretty much had to struggle to hold back my tears in this movie. And I'm not a guy who cries easily in a movie, And I'm sure many of you, male and female, will be crying when you're watching this movie, and the tears are well earned. They really are. Because this movie is just one of the most emotional journeys I have seen characters go on in quite a long time. And I hope more films take on a similar journey like the kind they have here, of characters who are not only going on a physical journey, but also growing as people while they're on said journey. Because quite a lot of times you'll have movies where characters go on a journey and nothing really changes, but this movie actually shows characters going through a change and becoming better people in the process. And movies where people become better people are just some of the best movies that can ever be made. Alright, here it is. Number 1, Dunkirk. What a glorious experience of a movie. This movie, I mean, wow. Whenever I'm making my list of the best films of the year, for my number 1 pick, I always want to have a movie where I feel like I am in the world of the movie. I feel like the movie is literally coming to life around me and making me so engaged with the world that it's in that I never ever want to leave it. I want to see what happens to everybody and see a complete resolution. And Dunkirk is exactly that type of movie. In my opinion, this is the second best World War II movie I have ever seen. Saving Private Ryan is my number 1. But this film deserves to be among the list of the best World War II films ever made, because I've seen a lot of World War II movies as someone who studied history, and this one manages to stand out. This one literally plunges you right into the action from the moment it opens. You are there from beginning to end as these soldiers try to get off the beaches of Dunkirk and get home safely to England to avoid being killed by the Nazis. And every minute of this film is suspenseful, tense, dramatic, and your heart will not stop beating until you feel that everyone is safe and sound. And this movie tells 3 different stories. A story on land, a story at sea, and a story in the air. And every story is told over the course of a different time period, a week, a day, an hour. And when they all come together finally near the very end, it is a moment of great filmmaking unlike anything you will ever see. The direction of this movie, fantastic. Christopher Nolan needs to get an Oscar nomination for this. And if he does get an Oscar nomination, he needs to win. Not just because he's overdue from other films, but simply because few directors are like Christopher Nolan, and few people direct movies the way he directed this movie. Just every image, every shot, you can tell he had a strong hand in making that scene happen. You know that this is what he wanted. You know he wouldn't settle for anything less. And everything else is just equally fantastic. Hoyt van Hoytema's cinematography, amazing. Best cinematography of the year. This needs to win the Oscar for best cinematography because it showcases everything from the color palette of the beach to the color of the sky to the look of terror and hope on the soldiers' faces to the aerial sequences where you literally feel like you're spinning with the airplanes and the camera is literally spinning with them. Just some of the best cinematography you will ever see in a film about any war. The editing, fantastic. Brilliant editing. There is not a dull moment in this movie, and you feel like you are invested in every single second. Hans Zimmer's score, fantastic. Heart-pounding, dramatic. It brings energy into your body as you listen to it. The sound design, wow. The sound is fantastic because you feel like you're literally in the war itself. And of course, Christopher Nolan used a lot of real ships and real planes to help achieve this. And you literally feel like you have somehow been transported back into the Dunkirk conflict. And the acting is also fantastic. Now, some people have criticized the film for not having enough character development and not focusing enough on a specific character, But everyone in this film does a fantastic job because Christopher Nolan has said this movie is about the Dunkirk event itself, not just about one person who lived through it. Finn Whitehead, who's a newcomer, he's fantastic. I guess his character, Tommy, you could say is the lead character because it's him we follow at the beginning and him we follow at the end. Harry Styles from One Direction, he's really great. Admittedly, when he was cast, I was like, really? Why Christopher Nolan? Why? But Harry Styles, he's almost unrecognizable. In fact, I couldn't pick him out in some scenes. And he's unrecognizable to the point where if nobody knew who Harry Styles was, they wouldn't be able to find him in the movie. They'd just think he was some random actor. Mark Rylance is fantastic as one of the civilians who decides to take his yacht to go rescue the soldiers. Cillian Murphy is great as a soldier suffering from PTSD. Tom Hardy is great, even though we hardly see his face. You feel the tension he feels as he's trying to battle a Nazi pilot. Barry Keoghan is fantastic as a civilian accompanying Mark Rylance and his son, and his character, is literally scared for his life since, there's a very good chance he could die. And with this performance and his performance in The Killing of a Sacred Deer, Barry Keoghan shows why he's one of the best young actors working today and why he has a very bright future ahead of him. Because if you watch Dunkirk and The Killing of a Sacred Deer, those performances could not be more polar opposite from each other. And the great thing about this movie is that it shows why this event was so important. It shows why the safety of these soldiers was paramount. It shows why it's important that this event be remembered. Because if these soldiers' lives had not been saved, the Nazis could have won World War II. They really could have, because they were strong. There were times when it looked like they could win, but because these soldiers were evacuated, it allowed them to put into action plans that would help defeat the Nazis in the coming years. Everything from the Battle of Britain to the United States entering the war to D-Day to everything. And Christopher Nolan understood the importance of that. Mr. Nolan, you have made one of your best films ever in your career. You have made one of the best World War II movies of all time, and you have easily made one of the best movies of this decade, and indeed the best movie of this year, and this film deserves every award, especially every Oscar that it can possibly get. So those are my best movies of 2017. Let me know in the comment section below what you think of my list. Please post your best films of 2017 lists as well. And stay tuned for my future videos and subscribe to my channel where I'll be getting back into the whole mix of awards season because I have plenty more of those videos coming. Thank you guys so much for watching. Bye.